In 2019, forensic archaeologists opened a First Dynasty tomb in Saqqara and found something that made them physically ill. Inside, 12 female skeletons lay in perfect formation around a fair sarcophagus. But it wasn't their positioning that caused the team to halt excavation for 3 days. It was their mouths frozen open in silent screams and their lungs still showing signs of desperate final breaths. These women were buried alive. But here's what makes your blood run cold. Toxicology reports found traces of a paralytic agent in their bone marrow. They were conscious, could feel everything. They just couldn't move or scream. Before you assume this is another story about hers or concubines, what archaeologists have uncovered over the past 5 years is infinitely worse. And it involves 3 practices that will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt. First, a live burial protocol that kept women aware during their own entombment. Second, DNA evidence revealing systematic abuse. That crossed 30 dynasties. And third, a ritual so disturbing that when I contacted the lead archaeologist, she refused to describe the full details on camera. By the end of this video, you'll understand why major museums are actively hiding artifacts in their basement archives. If you want to see the evidence they don't want you to see, subscribe now, because Section 3 contains findings that the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities tried to suppress. Your history teacher told you that ancient Egyptian women had it good, that Cleopatra ruled an empire, that Nefertiti stood as an equal beside her husband, that women owned property, initiated divorce, and held positions of power. And compared to ancient Greece or Rome, sure, Egyptian women had more legal rights on paper, but here's what nobody tells you. Those famous queens, they represent less than 0.1% of Egyptian women across 3,000 years of history. For the other 9%, the servants, the concubines, the minor wives, the temple attendants, life was a nightmare that historians have systematically whitewashed. I spent 6 months investigating this story. I contacted 17 archaeologists across 4 countries, and what I found was a pattern of institutional silence. Museums in Cairo, London, and New York are storing artifacts they will never display. Papers get published in obscure journals, never making mainstream news. Tour guides receive explicit instructions to redirect questions about certain practices. Why the cover-up? Tourism. Egypt's economy depends on the mystique of pharaohs and pyramids. The official narrative is golden death masks and romantic dynasties, not systematic brutality spanning 3 millennia. But in 2017, 2019, 2020, 3 archaeological discoveries shattered the comfortable lies. We now have forensic evidence, DNA analysis, and translated papi that reveal exactly what happened to thousands of women whose names were deliberately erased from history. The practices I'm about to show you weren't aberrations. They weren't the actions of a few cruel rulers. They were standard operating procedure, refined and perfected over 3,000 years. What you're about to hear is the story that Egypt doesn't want told. Let's start with the discovery that made a forensic pathologist quit the field entirely. But before we go further, imagine you are a young woman in 2950 BCE. The pharaoh has just died and you've been chosen. The priests come for you at dawn. You're 23 years old, a handmaiden who has served in the palace for 7 years. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've been selected precisely because you were favored. Because serving the pharaoh in death is considered an honor, they give you a cup of wine. You drink it. Within minutes, your limbs grow heavy. You try to stand, but collapse. You're still conscious. You can see, hear, and feel everything, but your body won't respond. This is hemlock extract mixed with mandra root, a paralytic cocktail that Egyptian physicians perfected specifically for this purpose. Here's the 4-stage protocol that the 2019 University of Cairo forensic team reconstructed from First Dynasty tomb evidence. Stage 1, administration of paralytic drugs. You remain fully conscious but cannot move, speak, or even close your eyes. Stage 2, ceremonial dressing. They clothe you in fine linen, paint your face, and adorn you with jewelry. You feel every touch. You understand what's happening. Your mind is screaming, but your body is a prison. Stage 3, positioning in the burial chamber. They carry you down into the tomb and arrange you in formation with 11 other women, all in the same paralyzed state. Some are crying, tears streaming down frozen faces. Stage 4. Ceiling. The stone door slides closed. Darkness. You hear the grinding of rock, the fading footsteps of the priests, then silence. Now here's the horrifying detail that forensic analysis revealed. Lung tissue examination showed signs of sustained breathing for hours after burial. These women didn't die from the poison. They suffocated slowly, fully aware, unable to move in pitch darkness. The lead pathologist, Dr. Amamira Hassan, told me she found evidence of this practice in 17 different First Dynasty tombs. That's over 200 women in just one period of Egyptian history. She estimates the practice continued in some form for at least 500 years. But here's what keeps me up at night. Ancient Papyrite described this as the merciful death reserved for favored servants. The merciful option, because what happened to royal wives who failed to produce male heirs? That's when the true nightmare began. Don't click away yet, because what I'm about to show you involves DNA. It's evidence that proves something historians called impossible for decades. And it explains why genetic testing of royal mummies was banned in Egypt until 2008. In 2021, a team from the University of Manchester published a genetic analysis of remains from the Valley of the Queens. What they found should have been impossible. Royal children with non-royal paternal DNA. The official historical record tells us that pharaohs were obsessed with bloodline purity. Only the pharaoh could father royal children, but the genetic evidence tells a very different story. When you cross-reference it with medical pappy from... Here's what actually happened. When a royal wife failed to produce a male heir after 3 years, she entered what Pappy called the sacred fertility protocol. The language is bureaucratic and clinical. But when you translate what it actually describes, you realize you're reading a state-sanctioned system of reproductive torture. The protocol worked like this. First, physicians administered fertility-enhancing drugs. Ancient medical texts list the ingredients compounds containing toxic levels of lead, mercury, and arsenic designed to hyperstimulate ovulation. Women who underwent this treatment showed signs of heavy metal poisoning in their bone tissue. Second, if pregnancy didn't occur naturally within 60 days, the papar described divine intervention. Ceremonies where the wife was taken to a temple complex. And here's where the DNA evidence becomes damning, exposed to multiple men over a 3-day period. The text frames it as religious ritual. The genetic evidence calls it what it was. If pregnancy resulted and the child was female, both mother and infant faced execution. Valley of the Queens excavations found multiple burial sites where mother and infant remains show identical trauma patterns. Spontaneous death, often by blunt force. But here's the detail that made me physically ill. If the child was male and accepted as divinely granted, the mother received a temporary reprieve. Temporary because the genetic testing revealed something else. Many of these women underwent the protocol multiple times. Some bone samples showed evidence of up to 6 pregnancies in spans of less than 8 years. Imagine the psychological torture. You survive the poisoning. You survive the assault. You successfully bear a son. And then 3 years later, when the pharaoh wants another heir, it starts again. The Manchester team estimated that based on genetic anomalies found in tested royal mummies, this practice affected dozens of royal wives across the Middle and New Kingdom periods. Roughly 1,500 years. But as horrific as this was, it was still considered better than the punishment reserved for queens who betrayed the pharaoh. I know this is getting dark, but if you're still watching, you're clearly as fascinated by history's brutal truths as I am. Because what comes next happened to women you've actually heard of. In 2017, archaeologists working in a forgotten annex of the Valley of the Kings made a discovery that rewrote what we thought we knew about Hatshepsut's family. They found remains of a young woman in an unmarked chamber. Dental records and age analysis suggested she was Hatshepsut's stepdaughter, a royal princess who simply vanished from historical records around 1457 CE, but it wasn't her identity. That made headlines. It was her face, or what was left of it. Forensic analysis revealed that the destruction happened before death. Her facial bones showed systematic, deliberate trauma. Her nose had been removed, cheekbones were shattered. Her jaw was partially disarticulated, and chemical analysis of the surrounding tissue proved she was alive when it happened. This was damnatio, the ultimate punishment for royal women who fell from favor. And here's what nobody tells you.
It
wasn't rare. We've now identified this pattern in at least 8 other royal female remains across multiple dynasties. The process was specific and theatrical. Phase 1, public accusation. Whether for adultery, conspiracy, or simply losing the pharaoh's favor, the woman would be dragged before court and formally denounced. Phase 2, monumental erasure. While she watched, forced to stand in the sun for hours, workers would climb her monuments and chisel away her face, her car too, every trace of her name. In ancient Egyptian belief, this didn't just erase you from history, it destroyed your soul's ability to reach the afterlife. Phase 3, physical mutilation. The papi are explicit. Let her face mirror her monuments. They removed her nose, often, while she was conscious. They shattered the bones that gave her face its structure. The goal was to make her unrecognizable in this life and the next. Phase 4, slow death. She would be confined in a public space. Some accounts describe cages in temple courtyards and left to die from exposure, dehydration, and starvation, while citizens and pilgrims passed by. The process took between 5 and 14 days. What makes this even more devastating? We found evidence this happened to someone you definitely know. Recent analysis of defaced monuments at Amana suggests Nefertiti's eldest daughter, Meriton, suffered exactly this fate around 1330 BCE. She appears prominently in artwork until year 13 of Akhenaten's reign, then vanishes completely. Her monuments show the telltale erasure pattern, and in 2019, remains matching her age and status were found in an unmarked pit showing characteristic facial trauma. The most beautiful family in ancient Egypt had their daughter's face systematically destroyed. But as unthinkable as this sounds, there's one more practice that's even worse. What I'm about to reveal was deliberately suppressed by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities for 4 years. The evidence only became public because of a leaked research paper. In 2020, during renovation work at Dendra Temple, construction workers broke through a false wall and discovered a chamber that wasn't on any architectural map. Inside, apparatus that archaeologists couldn't immediately identify. Stone basins with channels, restraint mechanisms built into the walls, and dozens of papi describing ceremonies conducted in absolute secrecy. When researchers translated the papi, they uncovered the most disturbing practice in ancient Egyptian history, the sacred marriage of divine union. Young women, typically between 15 and 25 years old, were designated as wives of the god, specifically the deity Hathor at Dendera. The texts describe this as a great honor. The reality was ritualized, near-death experience conducted repeatedly for years. Here's what actually happened in those chambers. Chosen women underwent a ceremony, the papyri, called divine drowning. The apparatus was sophisticated. Stone basins precisely measured to hold a specific water level, restraints that kept the head submerged at an exact angle, and trained priests who monitored the woman's state with disturbing precision. They would submerge her until she lost consciousness. Typicalibet, when 90 seconds and 2 minutes. Then they'd revive her. The papi described the resulting visions and hallucinations as the goddess speaking through her mortal vessel. Modern medicine calls it hypoxia-induced neurological trauma. And here's the nightmare detail. This wasn't a one-time ritual. The texts describe cycles. Some women underwent this experience every new moon for years. One papyrus fragment lists a woman who endured 63 ceremonies before dying during the 64th. Dr. Sarah Richardson, a neurologist who analyzed the remains found in Dender's crypts, identified patterns consistent with repeated oxygen deprivation, brain tissue degradation, specific cranial fractures from violent resuscitation attempts, and chemical traces of substances used to revive them. We found remains of at least 47 women in the Dendra crypts alone. And Dendra wasn't unique. Similar chambers have now been identified at temples in Kerak, Edfu, and Fa. Conservative estimates suggest hundreds of women across multiple centuries. The practice only ended when Rome conquered Egypt in 30 CE. Roman authorities were horrified and immediately banned the ceremonies, calling them barbaric. Many surviving gods' wives showed severe neurological damage, seizures, memory loss, personality changes, and here's why you haven't heard about this. When the discovery was first reported to the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities in 2020, they classified the findings and pressured the archaeological team to delay publication. Why tourism? These temples are major attractions. Can you imagine the headlines? Egyptian tourist site used for ritualized torture. The research only became public when a team member leaked the paper to an international journal in 2023. Even now, the Dendra crypts remain closed to the public. The official reason? Structural instability. It's a real reason. The apparatus is still down there and they don't want you to see it. So let's add it up. Conservative estimates suggest over 10,000 women across 30 dynasties subjected to these practices, 10,000 women whose suffering was systematic, refined, and perfected over 3 millennia, 10,000 women whose names were deliberately erased, whose stories were buried, whose remains are stored in museum basement where tourists will never see them. This matters today because we are still doing it, not the specific practices, but the systematic erasure. We are still whitewashing history to make it comfortable. We're still hiding evidence that contradicts the narratives we want to believe. We're still prioritizing economic interest over historical truth. Every time you see a glamorous documentary about Cleopatra or Nefertiti, remember, they're showing you the 1%. The other 99% died in ways we're too uncomfortable to discuss in museums. These women weren't exceptions to ancient Egyptian society. They weren't victims of a few cruel pharaohs. This was ancient Egypt, the part that doesn't sell tickets or inspire wonder. So, we pretend it didn't at hand. Here's my question for you, and I genuinely want